It was just past midnight when a convoy of black SUVs rolled quietly into the lot of a military hospital on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the night staff barely lifted their heads at the sound. Late-night visits from government officials weren't unusual. But then, the unexpected happened. The door of the lead vehicle opened, and out stepped President Donald Trump, flanked by a silent wall of Secret Service agents. There were no flashing cameras, no reporters chasing soundbites. This wasn't a photo op or a press event. It was something else entirely. Whispers began to spread like a spark through dry grass. He wasn't here to make speeches. He wasn't here to pose for pictures. Dressed sharply, Trump adjusted his suit and walked through the sliding glass doors with a steady, purposeful stride. The hospital's chief physician, Dr. Reynolds, rushed toward him, clearly uncertain how to proceed, but before he could stumble through a formal greeting, Trump raised a hand. "I'm not here for politics," he said, his voice firm but quiet. "Take me to the soldiers." The fluorescent-lit hallways echoed only with the soft hum of machines and the muted footsteps of nurses making rounds. This hospital was home to those who had given everything in service to their country. The wounded, the broken, the forgotten. Some lay in beds with visible scars. Others bore injuries hidden beneath the skin, wounds of the mind, soul, and memory. Trump walked slowly, eyes scanning the faces that had once worn proud uniforms. Each face told a story, some etched with pain, others hollow with silence. From behind a station desk, a young nurse named Sarah watched with wary curiosity. She'd seen politicians come and go before, smiles polished, promises empty, photos snapped before they vanished. But tonight felt different. Trump wasn't followed by handlers. He wasn't delivering lines. He was searching, though for what, Sarah didn't yet know. Eventually, he stopped beside a bed near the far corner of the ward. The young man lying there stared blankly at the ceiling, a nameplate clipped to the rail, Private James Carter. He was a double amputee, his legs lost to a roadside bomb that had also stolen his sense of purpose. Abandoned by his fiancée, forgotten by friends, James lived in silence, floating in a space where hope used to be. When he noticed the president standing beside him, he didn't flinch. He only sighed. "You don't have to pretend you care," he said flatly. But Trump didn't leave. Instead, he pulled a chair close, sat down, and said quietly, "Tell me your story." At first, James hesitated. But something in Trump's tone, unguarded and raw, unlocked a door inside him. Words began to pour out. He spoke of the explosion, of the screams, of the pain that had never really gone away. He spoke of the endless nights, the phantom limbs, the isolation that had grown like mold over his spirit. Trump listened. He didn't interrupt. Not once. His eyes never left James's face, and when the soldier finally paused, exhausted, Trump exhaled deeply. "That's a damn shame," he said quietly, his voice carrying something close to regret. "Because you're a hero. And this country should never forget that." For the first time in months, James felt like someone truly saw him. Trump patted his shoulder and added, "You're not alone. I won't let you be." Across the room, Nurse Sarah had witnessed the entire exchange. She had cared for James through the darkest nights, watched him turn away from food, from conversation, from life itself. Now, she saw a flicker of something return to his eyes. Maybe belief. Maybe warmth. She approached cautiously. "Mr. President," she said, her voice soft, "there are others like James. Soldiers who've been left behind." Trump turned to her, expression sharp but attentive. No words were needed. She began walking down the hallway, leading him past more beds, more lives suspended in time, until they reached a closed door at the far end. "Room 207, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He hasn't spoken to anyone in weeks." Trump gave a small nod and reached for the handle. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a street lamp through the blinds. An older veteran sat in a wheelchair, back to the door, staring at the night sky. Sergeant William Reynolds. His presence felt like a shadow lingering too long. He didn't turn when Trump entered. "Another visitor come to pity me," he muttered bitterly. Trump didn't answer. He simply sat down across from him, hands folded in his lap. "No pity," he said. "Just respect." That word seemed to catch William off guard. Slowly, he turned his head, skepticism in his eyes. He looked tired. Hollow. His son had died in combat, Lieutenant Jason Reynolds, a name that had barely passed through headlines before being forgotten by the world. William felt broken beyond repair, left to carry a grief that had no place to go. But Trump knew. He spoke of Jason's final mission, how he had saved his unit, how he had been brave when it mattered most. And for a moment, the silence in room 207 held something sacred. Something unspoken passed between the two men, something real. "I won't forget," Trump said, his voice steady and resolute. William Reynolds scoffed, still guarded after years of disappointment. But something in the way those words were spoken, without hesitation, without showmanship, cut through his defenses. It wasn't a line. It was a vow. Trump stood there, firm in posture, eyes locked with the grieving father's. "His name will be honored," he added. "I'll make sure of it." Something shifted in William's face then. The years of bitterness, of drowning in silent sorrow, cracked just slightly. His eyes welled up, glassy with emotion he had long buried. For years, he had convinced himself that his son's sacrifice had faded into history, another forgotten casualty of war. But tonight, in the quiet of that hospital room, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself in a long time: hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone still cared. Someone would remember. Trump turned to the surrounding hospital staff, now gathered in quiet attention. "I need a list," he said. "Every fallen soldier whose family is struggling. Every veteran we've let slip through the cracks." The staff exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't the kind of directive they were used to hearing. Not from a politician. But something in his tone told them it wasn't an empty demand. It was a call to action. A doctor stepped forward, hesitant but moved. "We can do that, Mr. President." Trump gave a single nod. "Then let's get to work." That night, he didn't just shake hands or nod solemnly and walk away. He stayed. He pulled up chairs in break rooms, listened to doctors talk about long hours and underfunded units. He took notes from nurses who had carried the emotional burdens of forgotten soldiers. He made calls, filled notebooks with names, and arranged meetings right there in the hospital. Real work began. And for the first time in a long while, the names inside those dusty files weren't just cases, they were people. Lives worth remembering. As Trump exited the ward, something caught his eye. A small boy sat alone on a bench in the hallway, clutching a weathered teddy bear. His eyes were wide, glassy, heavy with exhaustion no child should ever know. He looked up at Trump, his gaze unsure, his spirit already worn thin. Trump slowed, knelt beside him, and placed a hand gently on the boy's arm. "What's your name, champ?" he asked softly. The boy hesitated, then answered in a whisper, "Michael." His mother stood nearby, her eyes red and swollen, her posture stiff with worry. She stepped forward. "His father. Captain Rodriguez, he's in critical condition. We don't know if he'll." Her voice trailed off, too brittle to finish. Trump turned toward the ICU, glancing at the closed door, then back to the boy. He rested a reassuring hand on Michael's small shoulder. "Your dad's a fighter," he said gently. "And fighters don't give up." Michael nodded faintly, clutching his teddy bear a little tighter. Inside the ICU, the light was dim and sterile. Machines beeped steadily. Captain Rodriguez lay unconscious, unmoving, pale against the stark white of his sheets. Trump pulled up a chair, leaned in close, and spoke barely above a whisper. "Your son is waiting for you," he he said. You've given everything to this country. Now let us give something back. The only sound was the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. But then, a flicker. The captain's eyelids trembled. A nurse, watching from the doorway, gasped. He hadn't moved in days. A single tear traced a path down the soldier's cheek. Trump placed a hand over his and whispered again, "Hang in there." Later that night, just before leaving the hospital, Trump approached Michael's mother and handed her a sealed envelope. "Open this when you're ready," he said, and without waiting for a reply, walked away down the hall. Hours passed before she found the courage to unfold the letter. Inside was no official form, no government pamphlet. Instead, she found a handwritten note, ink pressed deep into paper by a steady hand. The words were personal. Gratitude for Captain Rodriguez's service. Encouragement for Michael's future. A promise. A full scholarship for her son's education. Alongside the letter was a signed authorization for immediate financial assistance to struggling military families. Tears spilled down her cheeks. It wasn't just a letter. It was hope. A small, powerful lifeline at a time when she'd nearly lost faith. As Trump returned to the White House in the early hours, his mind was racing. He didn't sleep. Instead, he picked up the phone. He called lawmakers, military officials, and members of his inner circle. Conversations spilled deep into the morning. They talked about healthcare for veterans, about expanding mental health resources, about ensuring full education for children of the fallen. By sunrise, his desk was covered in drafts, charts, and proposals. When his staff arrived, they were caught off guard by the pace. "We need action," Trump said, holding up a stack of documents. "These men and women gave everything. Now it's our turn." The machinery of government moved. Quietly, but decisively. And while no official photos from the hospital visit were ever released, word began to spread throughout the military community. Not from press releases, but from whispers. From stories passed between hospital beds and phone calls from support groups that suddenly started reaching out. In the days that followed, the impact became real. Veterans who had slipped through the cracks began receiving calls, visits, support. At the hospital, soldiers who had once felt invisible found themselves being seen again. Sarah, the nurse who had witnessed it all, could hardly believe what she was seeing. She had expected the visit to be brief. Symbolic. Forgettable. But now, watching real change take shape, she whispered to a colleague, almost in disbelief, he actually meant what he said. For the first time in what felt like years, hope moved quietly through the halls of the military hospital. It didn't arrive with fanfare or headlines. It came in the form of renewed spirits, strengthened bonds, and a silent belief that someone still cared. Late one night, far from the public eye, President Trump sat alone in the Oval Office, holding a small photograph in his hand. It was the image of Sergeant William Reynolds' son, Jason, dressed in uniform, young and proud. Trump traced the edges of the photo with his fingers, his expression distant. Jason had been a hero, one of many whose names never made the evening news. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small, weathered stack of papers, names of soldiers, notes about their stories, fragments of lives he had encountered during that unforgettable visit. A whisper left his lips. "I won't forget you." The words were barely audible, yet they held the weight of a solemn vow. Amid all the chaos of political battles and national pressure, this was what truly mattered: human lives, silent struggles, quiet sacrifices. And that night, Trump made a promise to himself that their stories would not be left behind. Months passed, and the hospital transformed. One afternoon, Nurse Sarah sat down at her desk, hands trembling slightly as she drafted a letter she never imagined writing. She had seen firsthand the changes that took root after that night. Soldiers once lost in despair were now receiving therapy, support, and resources they'd never thought possible. All because a president had shown up, not for cameras, not for applause, but because he had chosen to listen. Sarah sealed the letter, addressed it to the White House, and sent it off, not expecting anything in return. He was the President of the United States, after all, surely there were bigger matters waiting for him. But then, something extraordinary happened. One crisp morning, Sarah found an envelope resting in her mailbox. Embossed with the White House seal, it stood out immediately. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing a handwritten note inside. Sarah. The real heroes are people like you. The ones who never stop fighting for these soldiers. Thank you for what you do. You inspire more than you know. Donald J. Trump. Tears welled in her eyes, but it wasn't just the note that caught her breath. Inside the envelope was something even more remarkable, a signed bill approving sweeping improvements to military hospital conditions nationwide. It was no longer just words. It was real. Tangible. The kind of change that reshapes lives. Clutching the letter to her chest, Sarah knew then, the world might never understand the full story of that night, but she did. And that was enough. Nearly a year later, something unexpected took place at the White House. There was no press, no stage, no speeches. Just a private gathering, veterans from across the country, quietly invited to a solemn event that wasn't about politics but about healing. Among those in attendance was Sergeant William Reynolds. He had lived for years in the shadow of loss, his son's memory tucked away like a wound that never closed. As he approached the president, Reynolds took Trump's hand and held it tight. "You kept your promise," he whispered. Trump gave a simple nod. Nearby, James Carter, the young soldier who had once stared hopelessly at a hospital ceiling, now stood confidently, surrounded by fellow veterans. He had created a support group that grew far beyond what anyone expected. What began as a few voices in a circle became a national network, helping thousands of struggling veterans find purpose again. "I'm alive because of that night," James told Trump quietly. Trump said nothing, just placed a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes, words weren't needed. Reporters would later ask James about his journey, about how he'd pulled himself back from the edge. He would always give the same answer: "He made me believe I wasn't worthless. That's why I'm still here." His story became a beacon. A ripple effect of redemption that proved even the darkest nights could be turned around by a single act of compassion. A year to the day after that midnight visit, Trump returned to the hospital. But this time, he wasn't a stranger. He was welcomed like family. Patients who had once turned away now smiled when they saw him. James, now in his wheelchair, moved from bed to bed, speaking to new arrivals, offering them the same hope he had once been given. Sarah met Trump at the entrance, eyes bright with emotion. "You did more than visit," she said. "You changed lives." Trump smiled softly, then shook his head. "They changed mine." As he walked the halls, he paused outside a familiar room. Captain Rodriguez, once clinging to life, now stood tall in full recovery. He saluted with pride. "I made it." Trump gripped his hand firmly. "I never doubted you." As the visit drew to a close, Sergeant William Reynolds stepped forward one last time. With his cane trembling slightly, he stood tall, and with a slow, deliberate motion, raised his hand in salute. One by one, others followed. Soldiers in beds. Veterans in wheelchairs. Nurses, doctors, janitors, all stood in quiet reverence. Not for politics. Not for power. But for something deeper. Honor. Gratitude. A shared moment of human connection and respect for sacrifices that could never be repaid. As Trump turned to leave, Sarah wiped away a tear. The hum of machines and quiet footsteps filled the corridor once more. But something was different now. The night that had once felt like any other had become a turning point. A reminder. A promise. No one there would ever forget what had happened.